Norma, you were asked to chair the National Working Group to look at an integrated assessment framework. Can you tell me a bit about why assessment is important for children?
Well, anyone who spends time with children is always thinking about how best to respond to them. How can you give them the best start in life? How can you help them learn? Watching out if there might be any risks in their situation. So all of us, all of the time, are assessing things. And if you just think even of someone in the playground, if a teacher's having to decide whether that bump on the head or that grazed knee just needs a sticking plaster, or whether it's something the school nurse needs to look at, you're assessing the situation, aren't you? It doesn't mean that somebody grazes the knee and you rush off to fill in a form before you decide what to do. But it is about being ready, if necessary, to explain why you decided to do that rather than something different.
So it's not just the formal process, you mean, where a lot of practitioners get together and speak a lot about the child?
It is that, of course, and whenever you've got a child where they've got significant needs and they may be very complex, then that will be important that the formal getting together is handled carefully in a coordinated way. But different levels and different types of assessment are needed throughout a child's life. And what we have been wanting to do is promote a consistent set of principles and to get a common way of thinking about children's needs that's appropriate for everybody who spends time or works with children. And we want people to think about children in a common way, but also to gather information in a consistent way, appropriate across all the agencies. And that's what the integrated assessment framework is trying to do. That's what the Scottish Executive is wanting to promote. So we start in the framework from the principle that no action should be taken without assessment. So even in the case of the child in the playground deciding how to respond to a grazed knee, you're making an assessment. What we're trying to get over is the principle that you don't take action unless you've assessed the situation. Things shouldn't just happen to children.
I take your point about the link between action and assessment. Could you perhaps tell me more about what assessment actually consists of here?
Well, perhaps I should quote the official definition from the Scottish Executive. And I'm going to read this to you. Assessment is an ongoing process of gathering information, structuring it, and making sense of it in order to inform decisions about the actions necessary to maximise children's well-being and potential. Assessment is a process, not an event. It's essential to give all parts of that definition equal weight. Too often, assessment focuses just on information gathering without analysing what does it all add up to and what's the action which needs to follow that assessment of all the information. An assessment can be puzzling to families. All these different agencies asking them similar questions, not coordinating things. So what we are trying to achieve from the working group and the work of the Scottish Executive is to make sure that there's a coherent and consistent way of doing this, and it's done once, not numerous times by numerous different people.
Could you tell us a bit about the policy context of all this then?
In recent years, there have been a number of important reports and inquiries. For example, For Scotland's Children, that report is crucial, and the Child Protection Review, which looked at all child protection services. They, along with some of the inquiries into child deaths, such as the Caleb Ness inquiry and the Kennedy MacFarlane inquiry, emphasised the importance of assessment and sharing information across all the agencies who were involved with a child. Too often, the focus has been on the targets and priorities of a particular agency, and the needs of the child can get lost in that approach. So people may think one agency is dealing with it, somebody else thinks, oh, that's been decided by somebody else. But the child at the centre can somehow drop between these different supposed helping networks. And so in 2003, the Cabinet Delivery Group set as one of its priorities for action information sharing and integrated assessment, so that the needs of the child, no matter what agencies were involved, should drive assessment and subsequent action. The importance of this in Scottish policy can't be overemphasised. It is a cornerstone of policy of all services for children in Scotland, that the child and the child's needs should be the central focus.
Tell me more about how an integrated assessment helps.
The Scottish Executive sees the integrated assessment, planning and recording framework, to give it its full title, as supporting a wide range of policy developments which aim to improve the integration of services for all children. Integrated coordinated assessment, it offers us a very good opportunity to improve the situation of children throughout their lives and to deliver services which are planned around the child. It fosters shared understanding across groups of different practitioners, particularly important in assessment for children with significant needs. It looks at the child's life across time, recording significant events, so you can build upon what's been happening before. It looks at all aspects of the child's life, how the child grows and develops, what the child needs from all the people with caring responsibilities, and what's happening to the child and family in their wider world. So you can get a rounded understanding of any child. When you have a wide range of professionals working together from different backgrounds, it can be very complex to bring all that together. And it's very important that we find ways of improving our regular ways of working so that it's always the child at the centre, that continues to be our focus.
So Norma, can you tell me other ways that an integrated assessment framework can help promote the child-centred approach?
We want to be very clear at any point where services are being provided for a child about who has responsibility for doing what. So there's no ambiguity. The chain of accountability, if you like, is absolutely clear, and what actions need to be taken when and by whom have been agreed. Where there's any level of formality involved in a particular assessment, then this will be led by the professionals, but the child and the family and any other significant people in that child's life must be involved. It's up to all of them to look at what information is available, what it all adds up to, and what actions are needed to follow so that the child will have needs met. If there are particular services which would help the child, that is decided collaboratively and the action plan for the future will be agreed.
Can you tell me a bit more why the framework's so important? I've heard some people say that, why can't we all use the same system, and indeed, why not use the same forms?
Well, we don't think about it as a form at all. What we're trying to encourage people to think about is a common way of recording all the aspects of a child's life which are important to that child and important in understanding what are the needs of that child. And we don't need that to be a form. If you've got a child, say, who's an aspiring, achieving, go-getting young person at the local high school, and you get their annual report, you wouldn't expect to see on it compulsory measures as a section in their school report, and yet that school report is an assessment. So what we're wanting is a way of recording which is flexible, which can be used in different ways at different times. And we have to remember that we're not just thinking about what does your achieving, aspiring young person need, but also what's appropriate for a child who may be involved with the hearing system, the children's hearing system in Scotland. And their compulsory measures might be a very important aspect of what's in that child's assessment, and there needs to be a way of recording it. But with modern technology, it doesn't need to be a form. There are ways of keeping a record where the important information that you need, appropriate to the circumstances of this child, will come up as needed, so that you don't have reams and reams of paper, but you have a concise and appropriate record matched to the circumstances and situation of the individual child. Because assessments have to suit a wide variety of needs and a wide variety of children, and they've got very differing objectives, we want to make sure that we don't flatten everything out into one way of thinking about it, which is linear and can only take on board certain things. It has to be able to reflect the whole variety of situations which children find themselves in as they grow towards adulthood. And that's why it's a framework, and that has to reflect that variety of situations.
So how would I recognise the framework?
Well, the framework has been built upon earlier work which the Department of Health and others did in developing the English assessment framework. And we tried in Scotland to take an approach which would put the child's experience and perspective more firmly at the centre, so that we could understand the child in the round, but as far as possible from the child's perspective. Visually, the assessment framework is built around a triangle, and this has three general areas of focus. The child's developmental needs as the first. Secondly, parents and carers' capacities to meet the child's needs and respond appropriately. And that includes, remember, a wide range of people who may be involved in the child's life, including teachers, respite carers, extended family, whoever might be important to that child. And the third side is the wider family, social and environmental factors which influence the family's life, the child's life. And you'll find more about this in other parts of the presentation. But I should like to emphasize two other things at this point. Too often, professionals can get very caught up in all the needs, risks, and difficulties without having time to consider what there is in the child's situation to build on and what the child brings in the way of strengths and abilities. So that approach, which has been common in the past, to think about deficits in the child's situation, can be very damaging to children and their families. And the framework takes a very positive approach. It tries to look at achievements and strengths and bring those together with any of the needs or any risks which there may be. So we keep coming back to this rounded picture of the child. The second point I want to emphasize is that assessment has to be clear and specific about what needs to change for this child, what needs to be done, or what resources would benefit the child. And it needs to be very clear about who is going to take responsibility for the next actions so that that can be continuously reviewed.
Norma, can you give me some insights as to why the framework is the way it is? I mean, how did it emerge from the group's thinking? I can imagine that these things aren't necessarily all that straightforward.
The working group developed a clear view that if a system is going to work for children, then it has to apply to all children from their birth and throughout their childhood and adolescence. And it has to be committed to identifying their needs at the earliest possible moment so that it can respond, not intrusively, but in a supportive way to whatever the needs are which have been identified. And it has to be able to keep the child there in focus throughout any work which is going on. It has to be responsive and it has to develop as the child develops and as the child's needs change. The policy in Scotland is that services must be child-centred, that they must focus on the child and not on the priorities of the agencies who have responsibility for providing for the child. So that sounds a bit contradictory, but the priority for everyone concerned with children has to be to maximise this child's potential. And we were very keen that that approach to all children in Scotland should be the driving force. We drew on the studies that have been done about resilience in children. We drew on studies in positive psychology, and we were determined that this should be something of a sea change in thinking about the needs of children and getting it right for every child, so that the assessment framework should be as relevant to children in Mulgai, Muirhead, from Craigmillar right up to the Western Isles, whatever their circumstances. It is a way of thinking about children's needs in a common, easily understandable way, but which looks at the whole child. And we want to encourage everybody to see their responsibility for every child within their communities, taking account of their history, their material circumstances, and their developmental needs as they change.
So it's pretty radical, really.
It is radical, but it's also very simple. And what's been very exciting for me is that this is clearly a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get things right for children. We can move now to a clear, coordinated approach to children's services, and that's the overarching policy of Scotland's Parliament, and we can focus on the child always at the centre of anything we do, and making sure that we are getting it right for every child.
Many thanks, Norma.
Thank you.